All right, Season of the Lost is here, and we've got a full 5 months to work through it. Already, we're seeing an insane Fusion Rifle meta, some game-breaking stasis builds, an amazing rework for trials, and so much more. As always, we've got another chance to earn or Guild the Conqueror title, but be warned, this season is going to be a tough one. Just like my videos for the past few seasons, this guide isn't really geared toward anyone in particular. Whether you're diving in for your first title, you just want some adept weapons, or if you're going for your 6th Conqueror in a row, I hope you find this video helpful, and if you do, subscribing to the channel and following on Twitch goes a long way and I really appreciate it. So real quick, let's just cover the basic rules of Grandmasters once again for the new folks here. Grandmasters launch on October 5th. You'll want to be power level 1345 to even launch them, but you are capped at 1345 with a contest modifier. So you don't need to power level anything past that point. If your team wipes, you go to orbit. You gotta restart the strike. You can't revive yourself, teammates have to get you up, costing a revive token. And to earn more revive tokens, you kill champions. Every strike has some more unique modifiers, extra splash damage, elemental damage, etc. Honestly, that about sums it up. They're really not for the faint of heart, but I believe in you. This time around, we only have 2 new Nightfall weapons, both returning from D1. First, we have the Comedian, a void aggressive frame shotgun. And then we have Hothead, an adaptive frame rocket launcher that is arc, despite the name and appearance of it. I don't know. We can dive into these weapons in another video, but quite frankly, there are better choices for both archetypes available right now. Like, just go get a Heathen from Bog or something. For better or worse, this season actually has 2 potential weapon drops every week. RNG Nightmare aside, all 6 previous Nightfall weapons are available this season. So if you missed any of the rolls that you want, now is really not a bad time to go get them. This season, Bungie shook things up a little bit with the Conqueror title. The catch-up node on the Director, which usually opens up when there are about 3 weeks left in the season, will actually be available from day 1 on October 5th. If you want to get your Conqueror title in a single day, you really can. The catch is this: if everyone in your fire team has already completed a strike, you cannot select that strike from the node. If it happens to be the weekly Nightfall, you can still play it. No more end of season grind to the easiest strikes like Lake of Shadows. If you plan on farming, you'll need to run the weekly Nightfall. So it's really up in the air right now whether the seasonal meta will make GMs trivial like last season, shout out to Breach and Clear, or absolutely brutal. Either way, we've got some of the hardest strikes on the list this season. Huge credit to Redrick Servant on Reddit for this graphic, showing shields, modifiers, and champion types. So this season, we have Hallowed Lair, Lake of Shadows, Exodus Crash, The Corrupted, Devil's Lair, and Proving Grounds. So let's just talk about some of the tougher ones for a second here. Hallowed Lair is the biggest surprise of the bunch. Now that we have Scorn champions, this monster strike is in the pool, and it might just be the hardest one here. As if this strike wasn't hard enough, most enemies do stasis damage now in here. So we'll see how this one plays out. The Corrupted is of course one of the most notorious GMs we've ever had. Back in Arrivals, this was the blocker for so many titles. But this time around, we have stasis, we have other new abilities, we have new mods, we have new weapons. We have a ton of new stuff to make this easier. Still, expect this to be very similar to Glassway, if not harder. Proving Grounds, the big blocker from Season of the Chosen. Do not expect this one to be any easier this time around. If anything, it's going to be harder because of all the sandbox changes. Every meta super regen exotic got nerfed, so have fun. Don't sleep on the rest of these strikes either, but definitely brace yourself for these 3 in particular. Maybe this season I'll actually get around to making individual GM guides. If that's what you want to see, let me know. With that out of the way, let's take a look at the artifact mods for the season and how they shape this meta. So this season's artifact is interesting to say the least. We have some really cool stuff and some not so cool stuff. For starters, let's go over the champion mods for the season and a quick refresher on how each champion works. First up, we have our only anti-barrier mod this season, anti-barrier auto rifles. For any strike with barrier champions, you're going to want somebody running Ariana's Vow, honestly. And just use the auto rifles as a backup. Pick up this mod anyway, it's worth having, but it is far from amazing. Barrier champions are really straightforward. After taking enough damage, they'll put up a shield and start healing. Damaging the shield with anti-barrier weapons prevents the champion from healing, and popping it stuns them so you can go in for the kill. Next up, we have Overload Bows. Don't sleep on this one. Bungie is showing us some mercy here, because this is one of the best mods in the game. Bows are fantastic for mid to long range ad clear and GM content, and by far the most consistent weapon for Overload champions. Every single arrow is an overload shot as long as you pull it all the way back. At the bottom of this column, we have Disrupting Blade, another overload option. You might think it's kind of stupid to dive in at a GM champion with a sword, but if you combine this with Passive Guard, it makes really short work of overload champions. Honestly, I say this is a must-have for Exodus Crash. Not so much any other strike, but pick it up for that one alone. Overloads are probably the most confusing champion type to most players, but honestly, they are pretty simple, just very poorly explained in game. Think of it like this. Overload champions have an invisible ability meter. While this meter is fully charged, they'll fully heal and teleport like crazy. Overload weapons will pause this meter and stun the champion. These are two separate mechanics. As soon as the champion unstuns, the meter starts filling up fast. Here's the important part. You need to keep peppering the champion with overload rounds even when they are not stunnable. That way their ability regen stays down, they don't heal, they don't teleport, and you can keep them under control until you can stun them again. So for some reason, we have 3 unstoppable mods this season. Unstoppable pulse rifles are fine. We had these a few seasons back. They're nice, consistent, they get the job done. Pulses are not the strongest GM primaries, but they'll work. However, I do think this is very outclassed by unstoppable fusion rifles. I'm sure by now you know how strong fusions are this season. You may as well pick this mod up for a backup, but fusions are king. Fusions in general are just absolutely nutty this season, and that applies to linear fusions as well. The reworks they've done, especially for rapid fire frames, make them very strong options. So why not just slap a champion mod on there? Particle deconstruction in the artifact makes these unbelievably strong as well against every single enemy. You definitely want to grab both the champion mod and particle deconstruction. Unstoppable Sidearm is back. Just like last season, it's not remotely worth picking up. Don't even bother. Don't even bother. I'm not gonna say this anymore. Unstoppable champions are easy enough. They'll rush you down, you stun them, you damage them when they're stunned, and they will only heal if they kill a player. Really, just try not to freeze these guys with stasis. It basically locks them in an unstunnable state with full resist, and that is not a good time. Alright, so moving on to the artifact. The second column has some miscellaneous mods, nothing crazy, just grab whatever suits you. In the third column, I highly recommend picking up Passive Guard like we discussed, and grab the 3-point combined fusion linear fusion scavenger mod. The last 2 columns have some really cool stuff. Mostly just grab stuff that suits your playstyle, find some funny builds on YouTube, whatever you want. A lot of these really emphasize solar and stasis subclasses, elemental wells, stuff like that. There are some must-have mods in these last couple columns, but I will fully admit I have not tested all of these, so pick up what you want, experiment a little bit, try some funny builds, go for it. Withering Heat applies a solid debuff to champions. I'll be honest, I haven't tested it. It doesn't seem quite worth it compared to other mods, but test it out if you want. Resonant Siphon makes for some insane stasis builds, especially for champions like Overloads that just, if you freeze them, they keep stunning for some reason. You'll have constant ability energy. Thermoclastic Strike is a decent overload option. It gives your melee back instantly, but it could be tricky to keep overloads from teleporting and healing with this mod. I would not really recommend it. Seriously, just use bows. It's not really worth it. Fire and Ice gives you a ton of elemental wells. I haven't done much build crafting myself this season, but we are already seeing some really insane builds using wells, and the seasonal compass thing is going to be selling even more crazy mods down the road, so keep an eye out. Building right off of that, we have Well of Potency. Wells give you super energy. If you are running solar or stasis, this combo could be busted. Pyretic Embrace, I don't really think this is worth it, just skip on this one. Thermoclastic Blooming could be interesting, though it's definitely really build dependent. And finally, the last 2 in this column are must-haves. Focusing Lens is returning from Season of the Hunt. It dramatically increases light ability damage on enemies affected by stasis, including supers. And one really neat trick with this, if you're standing in a Well of Radiance and you have this mod equipped, even if you are on stasis yourself, your weapons will benefit from the boost. It is absolutely nuts. Definitely a must-have for GMs. Grab this one. Particle Deconstruction turns every fusion rifle into a DPS monster. Technically, only one teammate really needs to run this mod to apply the debuff. More can't hurt. And know that this is not against bosses or champions. This affects every single enemy. All in all, we have a really solid artifact here, and I really wish we can experiment with all of them at once because there's some cool stuff. that out of the way, let's move on to subclasses. Not a whole lot new here for the meta from last season, but there are a few changes to light subclasses and changes to exotics, so we've got some interesting shakeups. Before we dive in though, I want to share a quick tip I discovered with the new charged and uncharged melee bindings. So if you double bind charged and uncharged to the same button, this kind of acts as the opposite of the auto melee option. Your charged ability, like Hunter Smokes for example, will take priority over the uncharged, and then you can use the same input for uncharged attacks while building your meter back up. This can be a little finicky, especially if you're trying to melee immediately after shooting. But I mean, it's been really nice for me for Hunter Smokes. Try it out and see what you think. And yes, this also works on controller. So let's take a look at Hunters first. Hunters will typically want to run Bottom Tree Night Stalker or Revenant as always. Nothing crazy here, not much has changed. Arcstrider Supers got a really nice damage buff, but the subclass still lacks the damage resistance for endgame content. However, there is one meta shakeup that will make Gunslinger a top tier choice for GMs that have barriers: Lucky Pants. The Lucky Pants PvE nerf grants a massive damage boost to hand cannons of a matching element when first drawn. And guess what? That applies to Ariana's Vow. Even on Grandmasters, this build can absolutely melt champions in no time at all. So aside from the Lucky Pants build, we have the classic options for exotic armor choices. These have not really changed. Aeon Swift on Stasis help your team with heavy ammo, or Basket Backers for damage boosts. I will say the heavy ammo is particularly useful in this 1k Voices meta. Celestial Nighthawk is always a safe choice for solar builds if you don't want to run Lucky Pants. Night Stalkers will want to run Omnioculus, but Six Coyote is also a safe backup and also the better option for low mans. Finally, if you really want to test out the Arcstrider changes for yourself, put on Raiden Flux or Raiju's Harness and see how that works for you. Not a whole lot has really changed for Warlocks either. They are still by far the strongest GM subclass, and maybe stronger than ever, honestly. Well of Radiance is still a very good option, especially with Focusing Lens like we talked about. But remember, it is not foolproof on Grandmasters. You can still get one shot in a well. On top of that, the health of your well scales with the resilience. Phoenix Protocol is the way to go for a well build, although keep in mind that it now has a 50% cap of super regen. You cannot get anything past that. Mantle of Battle Harmony is also not a bad option for some creative builds if you're running solar weapons, but I'd go with Phoenix Protocol. Bottom Tree Dawnblade actually got some nice buffs this season, and may be viable for an aggressive build with Dawn Chorus. At the time of this video, Dawn Chorus is broken. It is going to be fixed next week. We'll see how it goes. For more aggressive builds, you can also run Top Tree Voidwalker with Controverse Holds, Constant Grenades, or Middle Tree Stormcaller with Geomags. These old classics are always strong options, even with the Geomags top off being removed. All that said and done, Shadebinder is still arguably the strongest PvE subclass in the game right now, across all three classes. Weak Watcher turrets make very short work in most rooms, and with all the ability regen mods and builds we have right now, you can literally have like 10 turrets in a room. It's insane. Eye of Another World is the safest exotic for a stasis build, but if you really want to get creative, run a stasis weapon with Headstone and Verity's Brow. Verity's Brow was reworked a little bit this season. Now, instead of working on only entry weapon kills, it applies to any weapon kills that match your subclass. So it's interesting. It's not really a buff or a nerf. And honestly, this might be the one build where you want to use Unstoppable Sidearm. I don't know. So Titans are basically in the exact same spot as last season. Very little has really changed here. Middle Tree Sentinel with Ursa Furiosa is still one of the strongest options. Ursas did get nerfed this season, just like a lot of other super regen exotics. Your super regen now caps out at 50%, but they are still a very powerful choice. Bubble Titan is really not recommended, even with Helm of Saint 14. Just like Well of Radiance, the bubble now will get demolished if you are not running 90 resilience or higher. Thunder Crash is still just as viable as ever. Obviously, you want to pair that with Curse of the Falling Star. Inertia Override even got a little buff, so have fun. Behemoth also got some touch-ups to make it more viable in PvE. I'd still argue it's the weakest stasis subclass of the three in the sandbox. It's definitely workable, but not really the safest choice. Finally, I would argue Sunbreaker is very slept on, especially Bottom Tree. Pair it with Phoenix Cradle or Heart of Inmost Light, and your abilities will be demolishing entire rooms. If you're running solar weapons, like Mythoclast for example, and you want to be a little selfish, Path of Burning Steps can really buff your damage output. For the most part, our options have not changed too dramatically this season. Izanagi's Burden is always a top tier choice for solid teams, melt champions fast, but it does not have any champion mods itself this season. Divinity is always nice for a damage debuff. Intrinsic Overload pairs very well with his Nagis, obviously. Ariana's Vow is going to be vital this season, as anti-barrier auto is just not good. Alternatively, Arbalist is supposedly getting updated to have intrinsic anti-barrier for this season. If this happens before GM's launch, it'll be a top-tier choice in Ariana's contender, especially when paired with Particle Deconstruction. Just bear in mind, even right now, Unstoppable does not work with Arbalist. Anarchy may have gotten nerfed significantly, but it'll still be a really viable choice for GMs. It still works exactly the same on champions. You just have half the ammo. Next up, let's take a look at weapons that suit our mod selections. As always, we'll start with your exotic slot. Shaking up the meta, just about all exotic fusions and some linears are actually nuts right now because of particle deconstruction. Vex Mythoclast, arguably the strongest primary in the game. If you have one, you'll want to pull this out. Orange Driver is a fantastic crowd control and DPS choice, especially when you get the buff procced. Bastion has always been a strong sleeper pick and even has intrinsic unstoppable, so you don't need to use the mod slot. Finally, for heavy exotics, 1K Voices is absolutely insane right now, with Sleeper Stimulant following closely behind. With the return of Overload Bow and all the ammo changes this season, Lemon Arc, Tigua's Divination, and Trinity Ghoul are all very strong GM contenders as well. And if you're feeling a little more brave, Lament with Passive Guard can shred into barriers. Leviathan's Breath is also worth considering. Just remember that it will not benefit from Overload Bow since it has intrinsic unstoppable already. I know I typically spend way too much time going over weapon ideas, so I'm going to keep it brief this time and really just emphasize the perks and archetypes. Just remember to cover your elemental shield options with your loadout. With that being said, let's dive into auto rifles. So even though Ariana's is going to be our main barrier breaker, having autos in your team is always a wise choice for a backup. While 600 RPM autos shine in most Destiny content, you'll really want to run 450s and 360s for GMs. The extra range and damage per bullet will be vital for the medium and long range engagements of most strikes. So look out for perks like Vorpal Weapon, Frenzy, 4th times the Charm, anything like that to beef up your damage and reload. I would usually avoid perks to activate on kill, like Rampage, as you won't really be shredding red bars enough to keep these perks active on GMs. And finally, aim for range and stability masterworks. Next up, bows. Honestly, we don't really have a lot of bow options in the game at the moment, but the choices we do have are very solid. For bows, you'll want to look out for Archer's Tempo in the 3rd perk slot. Almost every single bow has it. Explosive Head, Vorpal, or Frenzy in the 4th slot. Again, nearly every bow can roll one of these combinations. Realistically, only the damage perk in the 4th slot really matters, but every little bit helps. One particular bow to note is Point of the Stag, the Iron Banner ritual weapon from Season of the Worthy. This is one of the strongest arc options for bows. I know we have a lot of arc bows, but it's definitely worth picking up. I cannot emphasize enough, fusion rifles are insane right now. However, we don't really have a lot of great options, all things considered. Rapid fire frames in particular are really nice, so to cover Solar and Void, find a Vorpal Weapon Cartesian Coordinate and grab No Composure from last season. To cover Arc, you'll probably want a nice plug one with Reservoir Burst. If you happen to have the Adept, even better, but it's not vital. There are some decent options out there, but they're mostly high impact frames, so not really the strongest choices. Finally, pulses and sidearms. We'll just take a quick look here. Unfortunately, the perk selections aren't really fantastic for GM pulses, but see what you can find. Frenzy and One for All are really nice picks. See what you have in your vault, go grind out a nice Dark as Before, which is also a monster in PvP. I love that thing. If you really want to run a sidearm, Peace Bond with Headstone on a Stasis build is your very best bet. Heavy slot is going to be versatile this season, considering the exotic primary buffs and all of the options available right now. LMGs in particular got a really significant precision damage buff this season, and while they kind of fell out of favor after arrivals, they've always been fantastic choices for ad clear on GMs. Note that 7th Seraph Saw can make Warmind cells, which are still relatively useful despite the huge nerf. I wouldn't really build around them, but if you've got the mod slots, go for it. If you are not running an LMG, I would recommend a linear fusion to take advantage of particle deconstruction and stun unstoppables. Threaded Needle is probably the best choice. Reed's Regret is also a strong option, but we do not have stasis shields in the game yet. The Arc and Solar options, not that great, but they will get the job done. Finally, I highly recommend swords for Exodus Crash in particular, like I said earlier. Overload with Passive Guard will make short work of champions in the mid portion of the strike when defending the plate, and that will give you some really hefty boss damage. Personally, I like having 2 guillotines and 1 lament, The Lament will make very short work of the barrier servitors during the boss. However, I would not recommend swords for any other strike on this list. Just to wrap up the weapon talk here, if you have not messed with Dim's Loadout Tool, you need to use this. Here you can save entire loadouts, weapons, armor, everything, and just pull them to your character with a couple clicks. If you're not using this already, go fix that. Go make some loadouts. This thing is powerful. So we've covered weapons, we've covered subclasses, we got everything out of the way. Let's just dive into armor for a little bit. Selecting armor mods really has not changed that much. The meta has not shaken up that much. The biggest changes outside of the new elemental wall mods are stasis armor mods. Most of these won't really fit into a GM build, but there are some crazy exceptions. As always, prioritize recovery and intellect in your builds, mobility for hunters, and aim for tier 5 resilience to tank sniper shots. You'll want to slot at least one void piece to slot protective light, and you want taking turrets to proc it. Trust me, protective light will save you from so many wipes. Your helmet should typically have at least one ammo finder mod, and the other slots are yours to work with. If you are using a defensive super like Banner Shield, you can use 2 ammo finders. Otherwise, use a stasis helmet with a power preservation mod, maybe even 2, and you will make an insane amount of orbs on super kills. Chaining supers is vital to success in GMs, and this is going to help you so much. Slot your champion mods on your arms. Ideally, all 3 team members should be covering both champion types found in the strike. If you're running a weapon with intrinsic anti-champion properties, and you're running stasis arms, consider a grenade or melee kickstart mod for a significant boost in ability energy. Your chest piece should have at least 1 concussive dampener. If a strike has a splash damage modifier, slot on 2 of these. If there are a lot of snipers or on sniper resist, you should also consider elemental affinity resist depending on the strike. Scavenger mods were nerfed pretty hard. They're pretty expensive now, but if you can fit at least one, it is very nice to have. The new holster mods are okay, but they're not really necessary for PvE. They're more of a PvP thing to me. Finally, your class item will mostly be for slotting the interesting artifact mods. If you're on stasis, run Resonance Siphon. If you are not, and you have a stasis teammate, run Focusing Lens. If you're running fusions, stick on Particle Deconstruction. And I think that about sums it up for the season. I know I kind of skimmed through a lot of it. I want to keep it a little brief this time. I didn't want to be too lengthy. Of course, all of this is coming from my own past experience and early season speculation. So we will see how things really shape up once GMs launch in October. I know I was worried about GMs last season, and they were the easiest we've ever had because of Breach and Clear, so we'll see. We'll see. If you did find this guide helpful, let me know. Leave a comment, hit the sub button, follow on Twitch. Everything is greatly appreciated. Good luck out there. Stay safe. Get your vaccine. Wear a mask. And go get that Conqueror title.